Phantom of the Paradise is your standard supernatural rock opera horror comedy. You're probably not surprised to learn that it didn't do well at the time, but has gone on to become a cult classic, both likely because of this unique nature. The idea of the film begins with its writer-director, Brian De Palma. If you're familiar with the film, the three most obvious influences are The Phantom of the Opera, Faust, and The Picture of Dorian Gray, as the elements of these works are impossible to miss in this spectacle. But less well known is an old novel, A Cool Million, The Dismantling of Lemuel Pitkin. Now, this book was actually a parody of the works of Horatio Alger, who would write stories about impoverished youths who, through hard work and determination, would rise to a respectable position and get to enjoy the benefits of their position in the British middle class. A Cool Million instead told of the many misfortunes of Pitkin, who was constantly having his every effort thwarted, and even after death was used and abused as the National Revolution Party made him a martyr to advance their own agenda with disregard of Pitkin himself. But De Palma liked the book and even lifted one of the scenes from it, where Pitkin is thrown into prison and is told that all of his teeth will be removed for hygienic reasons. It's possible this book's effective look at the old trope contributed to De Palma's desire to twist all three of those famous works into a single bit of mockery as well. The idea that they all crystallize around was that hideous transformation artists frequently must endure. Now, this is no surprise. De Palma had been a successful independent filmmaker when, in 1970, he decided to make the leap to Hollywood to make a big studio movie. The film was Get to Know Your Rabbit, starring Tommy Smothers and Orson Welles. The Citizen Kane was one of the films that inspired De Palma to go into filmmaking, so it was certainly a welcome opportunity to work with Welles himself. However, De Palma's creativity clashed with the comedy style of Smothers, who had extremely strong opinions on things, especially in those days. This was approximately the same time that Smothers' provocations of Bill Cosby finally led to the comedian, at a party at the Playboy Mansion, to finally slip behind Hugh Hefner and punch Smothers in the head when he wasn't looking. Not to make light of what has happened, but I think we can all agree that if Bill Cosby would rather sucker punch you than hang out with gorgeous women, you must have really upset him. And if that's how Smothers treats a huge comedy success, you can imagine how he was willing to treat a guy making his first studio picture. When things finally came to a head, the studio was more inclined to back Smothers, who was still flying high in the wake of the successful show with his brother, and so De Palma was eventually kicked off his own picture. The film was finished by another director and did poorly, yet it was still De Palma who had his name tarnished by it. Thus, it's no surprise that an artist going through such an awful experience might serve as inspiration for him. In this case, rather than a filmmaker, it was to be a musician. Someone works hard to express themselves through music, works at it to create a song to express all the things that they want to, only to have it wind up playing in an elevator or while someone is on hold, to take this beautiful thing that they've made and turn it into something devoid of any artistic soul whatsoever. With this idea as the theme, the rest started to fall into place. So De Palma, together with Louisa Rose, put together the script. The two had worked together on Sisters, so they had developed a good rapport by now. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough. Nobody wanted to buy it. Finally, when Pressman Williams showed interest in making the film, they made their offer. $25,000 for the script. Low even for the 70s. De Palma wasn't happy, but he wanted to make the film and so was willing to accept the low bid, but Rose was not. De Palma was left with the hard choice of trying to hold out for a higher offer or rewrite the script without Rose's input and remove everything that she had added. He chose the latter, and it's understandable. The film is fairly odd even for its time, and convincing studios just to make it was proving nearly impossible. Edward Pressman was the producer at Pressman Williams, founded with his partner, Paul Williams. No, not the Paul Williams known as a singer and actor. The director, Paul Williams. But while De Palma was ironing out the script, he knew that they would need someone to provide music for the piece and got in touch with A&M Records. They got him the perfect man for the job, Paul Williams. Yes, this time it was the singer and actor. De Palma explains the idea. The protagonist creates the song from the heart, crafts this beautiful ballad, and then it gets distorted into a song by these greaser 50s rockers called the Juicy Fruits. And then it gets further distorted by these California rockers, the Beach Bums. Then it winds up even more mangled as it becomes an angry hard rock piece by Kiss-style band The Undead and the lead singer, Beef. It was Williams' job to craft the song in all these different formats and have it still be recognizable as the same song. No small feat. But Williams felt that he was more than up to the challenge, attributing it to the arrogance of youth that he would not only do all of that, but he would play a substantial role in the film as well. Some days he would work quite literally all night on the music for the film, see the dawn arriving outside the studio, then heading out to get a ride to the set, where the makeup from the previous day would be removed and new makeup applied for the day's shoot. Naturally, this started to catch up with him. In one particular scene, the shot had to be scrapped because Williams was so exhausted it was impossible to get him to remember his lines. They had to reschedule it. One particular kerfuffle happened while he was trying to do all the work for the music while performing live with Raquel Welch. Williams, who was rather noticeably short, was coming off the stage and ran into Welch, who asked, "How are they tonight?" meaning the crowd. Apparently his sleep-addled brain was only processing what was right in front of him because the only answer he could give was, "They look great," while looking at her chest. But Williams was really intrigued by the scope and ambition of the project and worked closely with De Palma while crafting the many songs that would go into this unique film. De Palma had been hoping to try to bring in actual bands like Sha Na Na for the Greasers and the Beach Boys for the California band, but Williams discouraged heading in that direction. First, because it might seem a little too on the nose to have those bands doing these parody versions of themselves, but also important was the fact that these were big successes, and even Paul Williams himself felt a little starstruck in their presence when he was with them, and he was worried that that could be a hindrance to their work. As I've mentioned elsewhere, one of the key things in being creative is to be willing to entertain all kinds of crazy and stupid ideas to see what comes of them, to be fearless of failure and just throw it all out there. But it's harder to do that in an environment where there's a sense of intimidation, whether it's from an intentionally stifling outside force or from within due to one's own insecurities. Williams was worried that they would be so nervous about saying or doing something stupid in front of these musical legends that they would stifle their creativity and the work itself would suffer. This allowed Williams and his team to really develop a solid rapport while they were developing all the different kinds of sound this film would need and all the great music they'd need to fit that. While this may be a parody, it was a parody of image and style, not a compromise of what made the music what it was. After all, they weren't doing parodies of unpopular music. This stuff was huge because people liked it. They needed something that could do justice to it, even while having fun with it. This really came together so that Williams would suggest something, and they would not only give him that, but an improvement upon that. In fact, they were doing so well that he recorded everything they did all the time, so that if he heard something he liked, he could take it and say, "Here, this riff you did was great," or "The way you put in that break was perfect, let's use that," and the like. The recording was done at Gary Ulmer's studio. Ulmer would work with Paul Williams several times, perhaps most famously on the music for the Muppet movie. Of course, while all the music was needed for the bastardization of the music of the Phantom, the reason he was doing the mayhem that he did was to ensure that Phoenix would be able to sing his music, because she alone seemed to understand it. To give her a song of her own to show how she could do that could transform a screaming theater into something as quiet as a tomb. He wrote Old Souls, a piece inspired because William's mother was dying, and he poured the emotions he had into that. It would be one of Williams' favorite songs that he ever did, and he was happy with its place within the film. As for the titular Phantom, De Palma cast William Finley, whom he'd worked with several times before. He knew Finley could deliver on the weirdness of the Phantom, but he was nervous that he couldn't handle the boy-next-door dreamer that was needed to establish the fall of this character. Fortunately, Finley was up to it, and so that meant it was time to transform him into the Phantom. Now, officially, that would be credited to John Chambers. Chambers had made a big name for himself, both for developing Mr. Spock's ears on Star Trek and what he did on the Planet of the Apes. So good was he that he won a, at the time, rare Oscar for Best Makeup, and so they wanted to really play that up. Oscar winner John Chambers is in our movie. Well, he didn't do a thing on the film. In actuality, Chambers had begun work for the CIA, developing disguise kits for agents. I know it sounds absurd, but he really did. In fact, he was heavily involved in the rescue of the diplomats, as dramatized in the film Argo, believe it or not. So Chambers had no real interest in working on the Phantom of the Paradise. So his partner, Thomas Berman, bought him out of the company and did the work. His brother did the design for the Phantom's special helmet, and Berman himself then sculpted it using a cast of Finley's head. He had to do a lot of the other makeup as well, such as the distorted face of the Phantom, and having a dentist cast Finley's teeth in chrome to show his replacements. All that work, and Chambers got all the credit. Hollywood, huh? Well, that might imply that this was a big-budget flick, but in truth, Phantom of the Paradise had lots of financial problems. First, it wasn't supposed to be called that. It was supposed to be Phantom of the Fillmore, but they couldn't afford the rights to use the name. So then it became Phantom, but there was concern about the title, so then it became The Phantom of the Paradise. All this was going on while they were shooting, of course. First in the record plant, the unique place where the crazy studio with all the knobs and dials is. Then to the Greystone Manor, owned by the American Film Institute, to stand in for the mansion of Mr. Swan, the villainous entertainment bigwig, before finally heading to Texas for the rest of the filming, because Texas was home to the Majestic, which would serve as the theater. This led to one unexpected wrinkle. The closing portion of the film had dancers dressed in the skimpiest outfits, a reflection of the decadence of Swan and his attempt to cash in on spectacle. That was the whole point of the climax of the film, after all, to appeal to the most base aspect of human beings. This wouldn't have been a problem if they'd been near Hollywood, where so many women are desperate to break into the business that they would be willing to take on any role just to have it on their resume. I'm not saying that as an endorsement, it's just an unpleasant fact. But to keep the costs down, they just went to local colleges in Texas and hired the cheerleaders to be the dancers. These ladies weren't so willing to parade around in outfits that were practically leaving them naked. And when tears started flowing, the costume department had to add tufts of fur to the costumes to make them something that the dancers were finally comfortable enough to wear. That was a compromise that was needed, obviously, but overall, De Palma had very specific ideas in mind that he wanted reflected. He wanted a real influence of Cabinet of Dr. Caligari on display in some of the work, and in others, a reflection of Swan himself and his ego. Faust is a tale of achieving power, and De Palma was of the opinion that when one gets power, one tends to start shaping the world around oneself to become a reflection of themselves and their passions. Hugh Hefner used it to create a decadent mansion. Walt Disney made a fantasy world, and Swan would make his world a reflection of himself. Even all the doors would be built specifically to his height, and as noted, Paul Williams wasn't especially tall, so other people had to duck through doors. But this was perfect. This reflected that sense of power. What better way to tell people, this is my world, than by showing them how it was built around his needs, not theirs. Thus, a great deal of elaborate work was needed, and revealed an unexpected participant on this film, Sissy Spacek. If you saw the film and wondered why you didn't spot her, don't worry. She wasn't an actor. She was actually the set dresser. It was early in her career, and appropriately, De Palma would give her her breakout role as the titular character of Carrie 2 years later. The reason for the elaborate work was that De Palma has an important philosophy about film as an art form. Too often, to save time and money, makers of film and television think that they're still making radio, in De Palma's view. If it's a conversation, the shot is doing little more than showing you the people who are talking. In his view, the camera shouldn't just be recording what's happening, it should be helping to tell you the story. One example was the use of the split screen to show different perspectives on the same event. Instead of cutting back and forth to show you, you see the events unfolding from both points of view. Another example is to show the sad condition of Winslow Leach. He comes on stage just after the Juicy Fruits have finished their performance, gaining all the attention, and then he plays his song. Unlike the recycled popular tripe of them, his music comes from his soul, and we see this as he sings passionately while the camera circles around him 360 degrees, showing us how much music is the very blood in his veins. But also behind him you see nobody. Nobody cares about him or his music. It's only those big names and familiar sounds that matter. Well, all this artistry does cost money, and eventually it started running out, and De Palma found himself trying to put things back together in New York, trying to at least patch things up. And between clever shots and creative editing, they were able to get all of the pieces that they needed to finish the film. And that's when irony showed up. Because in a film whose plot revolves around dark contracts, Phantom of the Paradise itself had a problem with the lawyers. First, because the label of the evil Mr. Swan was Swan Song Enterprises. And before the film was completed, Led Zeppelin created their own record label, Swan Song Records. And so De Palma was given no choice but to cover up the most prominent images of Swan Song in his film with shaky mats, because it would be impossible to reshoot everything without them. And of course, Swan Song Records has been defunct for more than a quarter century, but the poorly edited images remain to this day. The second was from Universal. Universal is responsible for most of the classic monsters in horror. That is, the form that they exist in America's collective consciousness. Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, the Mummy, the creature from the Black Lagoon, and so on. And during this time period was Universal's own big success with the Phantom of the Opera. Twice, actually. And they seemed determined to get a piece of this movie as a result. De Palma wanted to fight them on it, but it was only holding up release of the film. So instead, a settlement was released so that finally the movie could get out into theaters. Sadly, it drew little interest. It is a very unusual film, to say the least, and critics were mixed at the time, partially because it's hard to figure out how to even take the film on board. Parody when parody alone is not the point. Supernatural, but peripheral to most of the work. However, as mentioned, it was gaining a cult following, helped by its music, which did get the film a nod from both the Academy Awards and the Golden Globes. Paul Williams has worked with Daft Punk because of this film. The two saw it together close to 20 times and loved it. Del Toro liked it so much he bought the actual Phantom mask from this film and has discussed possibly having Paul Williams create a stage musical version of his film Pan's Labyrinth. While it still remains a rather obscure title, it's definitely had an impact on people. Tomorrow we'll take a look at the film itself, The Phantom of the Paradise.